Once again, Captain Ibrahim Traoré is doing the unthinkable, building Burkina Faso's independence from the ground up, literally. While many leaders talk about sovereignty, Traoré is planting it, equipping it, and watching it grow in the hands of his people. This isn't charity. It isn't aid. It's a strategic uprising against dependency, disguised as a national agricultural program. And it's working. I officially hand over the key to all these. I wish you a very good campaign. Let us pray to God.
What if a nation long dismissed as too poor to feed itself became the blueprint for Africa's agricultural freedom? This question is no longer hypothetical. It's unfolding in Burkina Faso, where a historic experiment is challenging decades of dependency and rewriting the rules of sovereignty. For decades, this landlocked Sahelian nation depended heavily on foreign aid, imported food, and donor-driven policies. Every drought would bring the same haunting scenes: barren fields, hollow-eyed children waiting for aid trucks, and endless appeals to the international community for relief. But under the leadership of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso is daring to confront a brutal reality. A country that cannot feed itself can never truly be free. A country held hostage by food dependency. To understand the urgency of this shift, we need to confront Burkina Faso's painful past. For generations, food insecurity plagued the nation. With over 80% of its population relying on subsistence farming, one failed rainy season was enough to trigger crisis. Even in years of good harvests, poor infrastructure meant crops rotted before reaching markets. The country imported rice, wheat, and processed foods worth hundreds of millions of dollars annually, draining scarce foreign reserves. International aid became a lifeline, but also a leash. Shipments of grain controlled by foreign donors came with conditions: liberalize markets, open borders for agribusiness giants, and adopt seed varieties that tethered farmers to foreign suppliers. Aid didn't just feed the hungry, it entrenched dependence. For many Burkinabe, this cycle felt like a quiet form of control, a sovereignty hollowed out not by military conquest but by food insecurity. The birth of a revolutionary plan. In late 2022, Traoré rose to power amid political upheaval and widespread anger at both insecurity and deep poverty. Yet one of his boldest moves wasn't military, it was agricultural. Declaring food sovereignty a national security priority, Traoré unveiled a sweeping plan: irrigate the Sahel, harness rivers, build dams, and transform drylands into fertile fields. Liberate farmers from seed dependency, establish local seed banks and ban exploitative patented seeds. Empower rural communities, create cooperatives to manage grain reserves and distribution, cutting out exploitative middlemen. Build agro-industries locally, process crops inside Burkina Faso rather than exporting raw harvests for foreign profit. His message was simple: we will no longer be at the mercy of foreign ships bringing food. We will grow what we eat, and we will eat what we grow. Why? This matters more than ever. The stakes couldn't be higher. Across Africa, food imports are soaring. The continent spends over $40 billion annually on imported food, despite holding 60% of the world's uncultivated arable land. In Burkina Faso's case, much of the fertile land has gone untapped due to lack of infrastructure and investment. Global shocks like the pandemic, Russia-Ukraine war, and rising grain prices exposed just how fragile this dependency is. When international shipments stalled, prices of basic staples doubled. For the poorest Burkinabe families, this wasn't inconvenience, it was life or death. This crisis laid bare an uncomfortable truth: aid cannot replace autonomy. Burkina Faso's leaders realized that foreign food donations often arrive too late, too little, and with political strings attached. The first seeds of change. The first signs of this revolution are visible in rural Burkina Faso. In villages near Bagre, where a massive dam now feeds irrigation canals, once barren fields shimmer green with rice paddies and maize crops. Farmers who used to survive on one harvest per year are now planting 2 or even 3 cycles annually. Local cooperatives are springing up everywhere. They pool labor, share equipment, and collectively manage grain storage silos. For the first time in years, these silos are full. Not with foreign aid grain stamped with donor logos, but with locally grown food harvested by Burkinabe hands. Stories like that of AWA, a widow from the Sauru Valley, are becoming common.
I used to walk to town begging for food aid. Now I sell rice at the market. My children eat every day. We're not waiting anymore. We are working.
A political gamble with continental implications. This push for food sovereignty is not just about hunger. It's a challenge to the world order. Traoré is positioning Burkina Faso as the spearhead of a broader African awakening, an end to the dependency model that has quietly persisted since colonial times. By prioritizing local production over imports, Burkina Faso is also reducing its exposure to foreign currency crises, global market shocks, and donor-imposed conditions. But this path has risks. Breaking away from food dependency could invite retaliation from powerful agribusiness lobbies and global institutions that profit from Africa's reliance on imported food. Already, Burkina Faso's policies have raised eyebrows in Western capitals. Critics claim its reforms could destabilize markets and alienate donors. But for Burkinabe citizens, these warnings are meaningless compared to the promise of full granaries and independence from handouts. What's unfolding is bigger than agriculture. It's a redefinition of power, identity, and pride. Traoré's vision is not simply to grow more food, it's to transform farming into a strategic pillar of national sovereignty, just as crucial as military defense or industrialization. If this succeeds, Burkina Faso could become the first Sahelian nation in modern history to feed itself fully without foreign help. And if that happens, it won't stop at its borders. Neighboring countries like Mali and Niger are already watching closely, considering similar models. This isn't just Burkina Faso's fight. It's a battle that could spark an African agricultural awakening, one that says, once and for all, that Africa will not be fed by outsiders but will feed itself. Do you believe Burkina Faso can pull this off and inspire Africa to reclaim its food systems? Drop your thoughts in the comments, subscribe for deeper insights, and share this story, because what's happening here could rewrite Africa's future. Travel across Burkina Faso today, and you'll witness a transformation so profound it almost feels surreal. In regions once parched and lifeless, vast green expanses now stretch across the horizon. What was once cracked Sahelian earth, littered with wilted crops and dry weeds, is now alive with rice paddies, maize fields, vegetable plots, and even fruit orchards. This is Burkina Faso's agricultural rebirth, and it's happening through a combination of bold state planning, grassroots empowerment, and a return to indigenous wisdom. In the past, farming here was an act of desperation tied to rain patterns that were unpredictable at best and catastrophic at worst. Today, Burkina Faso is rewriting that dependency. Massive irrigation projects are breathing life into formerly unworkable lands. The government has launched nationwide irrigation zones anchored around major rivers and reservoirs. Canals cut through villages, diverting water to farmlands year-round. In places like Suru Valley and Bagre, dams feed hundreds of kilometers of irrigation networks, turning drought-prone lands into fertile plains. Solar-powered water pumps now dot rural landscapes, replacing labor-intensive bucket systems. Farmers no longer wait helplessly for rain. They can plan, plant, and harvest in multiple cycles each year. One farmer, Isa, recalls, "I used to pray for clouds. Today I plant rice in the dry season. I've harvested twice this year for the first time in my life." Equally critical is the shift toward indigenous seed banks. For decades, Burkina Faso's farmers relied on imported seeds tied to foreign corporations. These seeds often required specific fertilizers and pesticides that kept farmers trapped in a costly cycle. Now, the country is reclaiming seed independence. Locally managed seed banks store and distribute indigenous varieties, sorghum, millet, fonio, cowpeas, resilient crops adapted to the Sahel's harsh conditions. This ensures farmers plant seeds they can save and replant year after year, free from corporate licensing fees. Agricultural extension workers travel from village to village, training farmers in seed selection, preservation, and exchange networks. The revival of indigenous seed knowledge doesn't just build food security, it reconnects communities with farming traditions that once thrived before colonial disruption. The state has also invested in domestic fertilizer production, cutting out expensive imports. Using Burkina Faso's phosphate reserves, new factories are churning out affordable fertilizers tailored to local soils. Combined with agroecology techniques like composting and crop rotation, soil fertility is rising and yields are improving dramatically. These reforms are restoring not just farmlands but also hope. Fields that previously produced barely enough millet to survive now yield enough surplus to fill grain silos and supply local markets. Central to Traoré's vision is community empowerment. The government has promoted village cooperatives where farmers pool land, labor, and tools to increase efficiency. These cooperatives also manage community grain reserves, which serve as strategic food banks during lean seasons. In Toma, women-led cooperatives now control a 250-ton grain storage facility. They regulate prices during food shortages, preventing speculators from hoarding grain to drive up costs. AWA, one of the leaders, says, "Before, traders controlled everything. Now when prices rise in the city, we decide whether to sell or hold. We are no longer victims." Burkina Faso is also tackling another overlooked problem: processing food at home. In the past, crops were exported raw, only to be processed abroad and sold back at higher prices. This raw export trap siphoned away value from African farmers. Now, small agro-industrial hubs are emerging in rural regions. Rice mills, cassava processing units, and peanut oil refineries keep profits in-country while creating local jobs. Farmers not only grow food, they participate in every step of the value chain. The results are visible. Villages that once emptied out as youth fled to cities or abroad now see young people returning. Farming is no longer viewed as a symbol of poverty, but as a patriotic, profitable endeavor. With land grants for youth-led farms and access to low-interest credit, the government is making agriculture attractive again. Even former herders and displaced workers are joining cooperatives, drawn by the promise of stable income and food security. Other African nations are watching closely. Mali and Niger, fellow members of the newly formed Alliance of Sahel States, are replicating Burkina Faso's seed and irrigation models. Delegations from Guinea, Chad, and even Senegal have visited Burkina Faso's pilot farms. The message is clear. If Burkina Faso, a country often dismissed as impoverished, can feed itself, so can others. This agricultural transformation is not flashy. It doesn't happen overnight. But each canal dug, each seed bank built, each cooperative formed is a quiet act of defiance against the old order. In the words of one farmer, "We no longer wait for aid trucks, we are filling our own trucks now." This is the ground-level reality of Burkina Faso's food sovereignty revolution. Slow, patient, relentless, and deeply rooted in both tradition and innovation. Food in Burkina Faso has always been more than survival. It has been a weapon of control. For decades, foreign aid shipments, imported grains, and corporate-owned seeds tied the country's fate to external powers. Alongside this, Burkina Faso is investing in domestic fertilizer production. Using its phosphate reserves, state-run plants now supply fertilizer at half the cost of imports, while composting and agroecological methods enrich soils naturally. Farmers who once struggled with poor yields now report bumper harvests. Enough not only to feed their families, but to stockpile grain reserves for lean times. Then comes the processing revolution. For decades, even when crops were grown locally, they were shipped abroad raw, rice milled in Asia, peanuts processed in Europe, before being sold back at inflated prices. Today, agro-industrial hubs in towns like Kaya and Suru are processing food within Burkina Faso. Rice mills, peanut oil presses, cassava processing plants, these aren't just factories. They're engines of independence, turning local harvests into locally consumed products while keeping profits in Burkinabe hands. Naturally, these moves have rattled the old order. Western governments and agribusiness lobbies are uneasy. They warn of market instability, while donor nations hint at aid cuts to punish Burkina Faso's defiance. Yet Traoré is unfazed. Backed by alliances with Mali and Niger under the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, and equipment deals with Russia and China, he stands firm. A nation that cannot control its own food will always be a colony in disguise. Food is our weapon of liberation. Every seed bank, every irrigation canal, every grain silo is more than a piece of infrastructure. It's a political statement. Burkina Faso is no longer waiting for handouts. It is declaring with every harvest that sovereignty begins with what grows from the soil. Burkina Faso's pursuit of food sovereignty is no longer just a national policy. It's a symbol of continental defiance, and its success or failure carries implications far beyond its borders. In a world where Africa holds 60% of the planet's uncultivated arable land but spends billions annually on food imports, the stakes could not be higher. If this experiment works, it won't simply transform Burkina Faso. It could ignite a pan-African agricultural revolution that challenges centuries of dependency. The vision of a self-sufficient Africa. Captain Ibrahim Traoré's government is openly framing this as a continental project, not just a national one. Through the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, the seeds of a regional food bloc are being planted. These countries are pooling agricultural expertise, sharing seed varieties, and co-financing irrigation and mechanization projects. Imagine this: grain reserves linked across borders, mechanized farms feeding entire regions, and internal trade networks bypassing Western-controlled markets. In this model, drought in one AES nation wouldn't trigger famine, because surplus grain from neighbors would flow in seamlessly. Delegations from Guinea, Chad, and even Senegal have already toured Burkina Faso's experimental irrigation farms and seed banks. The message is clear: if a landlocked Sahelian country, once synonymous with hunger, can achieve food sovereignty, why can't they? A continental awakening, but not without resistance. This vision is not without enemies. Global agribusiness giants, donor nations, and financial institutions see Burkina Faso's reforms as a threat to the status quo. Aid programs tied to structural adjustment policies lose power if African nations are no longer desperate for foreign grain. Western seed monopolies crumble if indigenous seed networks flourish. Already, diplomatic pressure is mounting. Aid cuts loom as punishment for non-cooperation with international guidelines. Foreign media outlets have begun portraying Burkina Faso's policies as radical or isolationist, framing its leadership as reckless. These narratives are designed to discredit what is, in reality, a grassroots-driven demand for autonomy. But Traoré and his allies argue that the real risk lies in continuing dependence. Each grain shipment tied to political conditions is a leash around a nation's sovereignty. His administration is betting that short-term sacrifices will yield long-term freedom. The roadblocks ahead. Yet this is no fairy tale. Challenges loom large: climate change, rising temperatures, and erratic rains threaten even the best irrigation systems. Burkina Faso must integrate climate-smart agriculture and invest in drought-resistant research. Security concerns. Ongoing insurgencies in parts of northern Burkina Faso complicate farming and disrupt supply chains. Infrastructure gaps, rural roads, storage facilities, and transport systems remain underdeveloped, risking spoilage and market inefficiencies. International retaliation. The nation faces potential trade sanctions, reduced aid, and blocked access to global financing if its defiance escalates. Despite these hurdles, Burkina Faso presses forward, embracing self-reliance not as an option, but as a necessity. The human transformation on the ground. Perhaps the most striking change is cultural. Farming, once seen by many Burkinabe youth as a symbol of poverty, is now a badge of pride. Land grants and credit programs for young farmers have sparked a rural renaissance. In villages like Ziga and Koudougou, young people who once fled to cities or attempted dangerous migration to Europe are returning home. They are organizing in cooperatives, pooling equipment, and learning modern mechanized farming techniques alongside traditional methods. For many, this is more than economics, it's identity. As one young farmer said, "For the first time, we feel we are not only working the land, we are building our nation." A blueprint for Africa's future. Burkina Faso's bold experiment could become the prototype for African self-sufficiency. If replicated, Africa could reduce its dependence on imported wheat and rice, build resilience against global price shocks, and keep billions in agricultural wealth circulating inside the continent. Already, AES leaders are discussing joint food reserves, pan-Sahel irrigation networks, and shared agricultural machinery banks. This vision extends beyond food. It lays the groundwork for a parallel economic order rooted in African unity rather than foreign dependency. If this succeeds, it would shatter one of the longest-standing myths in development economics, that Africa cannot feed itself without external help. It would also weaken a powerful lever of control used by former colonial powers and global financial institutions. The final question. Burkina Faso's path is risky, unorthodox, and deeply symbolic. It pits a small Sahelian nation against a global food system built to profit off its hunger. But if it succeeds, it will prove something extraordinary. That sovereignty begins not in palaces or parliaments, but in the soil beneath our feet. The revolution unfolding in Burkina Faso is not just about food, it's about freedom, dignity, and rewriting Africa's story on its own terms. Whether the world likes it or not, this nation is tilling the ground not only for its own survival, but for the seeds of a truly independent Africa. What's your take? Is Burkina Faso's bold push toward food sovereignty the spark Africa needs, Or is it too ambitious in the face of global pressures? Share your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe for more deep dives into Africa's transformation. And don't forget to like and share this video to keep this conversation alive.